Truth sometimes lies not in what people see, but in what has been intentionally erased. In those voids, collective memory begins to operate, not as a tool for entertainment, but as a survival reflex against an unnamed sense of injustice. The case of Yu Manglong emerged in such a context, not loudly with a declaration, nor closed with a verdict, but lingering like an unsolved question in the minds of millions. In the official reality, Yu Manglong gradually disappeared. There were no lengthy announcements, no full explanations, only a silent withdrawal from the spotlight and public spaces. But parallel to that, another reality was formed. In this parallel world, constructed by the community themselves, he still lives a peaceful life. He rides his bicycle on sun-drenched roads, plays the cello in a quiet room, and cares for familiar pets as if no rupture had ever occurred. These images are more than just a source of comfort. They reflect a collective effort to resist the feeling that a human being can be swept away so easily by mechanisms that the majority cannot touch. From a name pasted on car windows to human rights posters appearing in France and over 730,000 online signatures, Yu Manglong has gradually become a symbol of a question larger than himself. This is no longer a story about an artist facing a crisis, but a sense of insecurity regarding the right to live, the right to speak, and the limits of silence within complex systems. When the public looks back at old videos and previously ignored live streams, they are not just looking for evidence. They are seeking the meaning behind bloodshot eyes, unusual pauses, and sentences that seemed incomplete. What makes this story transcend the framework of an entertainment scandal lies in that very feeling. The question no longer revolves around how Yu Manglong behaved, but around what kind of environment made those signals for help so hopeless. In an industry where images are tightly controlled and emotions are often framed, offbeat expressions rarely appear by chance. And when they appear repeatedly in different contexts, coincidence begins to lose its persuasiveness. But behind the aura, behind the fragmented explanations and procedural rebuttals, what mechanism is truly operating behind this story? Who benefits from the prolonged silence? Who is pushed into a dead end, and why do these structures persist so stubbornly? When the stage lights no longer reach the darkest corners, what happens to the people standing within them? From this point, the story is forced to go deeper, tracing the smallest signs to understand how an artist can be caught in an invisible whirlpool, and how the entertainment world operates when no one is capable of speaking the whole truth. As the parallel images of Yu Manglong are preserved by the community as a way to resist his disappearance, small details from the past begin to be viewed through a different lens. Moments that might have been dismissed as fleeting abnormalities are now placed side by side in a timeline long enough to create the sense of a pattern. Not evidence, not accusations, but the feeling that something has been happening silently, repeatedly, and without being named. One of the most mentioned details is a video of Yu Manglong drawing a picture and asking viewers to guess the content. In that video, he drew two animals he called Fu Li and Huo Tui, familiar names that had appeared in everyday stories before. At first glance, this was just a simple, even naive moment, a rare break in a busy schedule. But for those who had followed him for years, the differences quickly emerged. The drawing style did not resemble the sketches he shared in 2015. It was not just a change in technique or inspiration, but a sense of fragmentation and a lack of coherence, as if the person holding the pen did not fully control their own rhythm. From that discrepancy, many interpretations emerged. Some argued that prolonged professional pressure could affect one's mental state and creative expression. Others paid attention to smaller details, such as a series of symbols in the drawing that they believed were familiar to emergency lines. There's been no official confirmation for any hypothesis. However, the rapid spread of these interpretations shows something else. The community had entered a state of vigilance, where every detail was read with an underlying anxiety that something wrong was being hidden. The sound of the video also became a subject of analysis. Many viewers noted that the voice in the video was resonant and hollow, with an unusual echo that did not resemble a typical domestic living space. This is not evidence, but a question. And when such questions appear repeatedly, they no longer revolve around right or wrong, but around the feeling that the context of the video might not be as simple as what was presented. In a world of tightly controlled images, context sometimes speaks as loudly as content. These suspicions became even heavier when the public looked back at Yu Manglong's performances and live streams during the period starting in 2020. At a performance event in Chengdu in August of that year, many audience members noticed his unusual mental state. Red eyes, a disjointed gaze, and a trembling voice, as if he were struggling to finish every sentence. In an industry where artists are trained to hide personal emotions, such expressions rarely appear unintentionally. They created a rhythm that deviated from the expected image, and it was that very deviation that made it impossible for viewers to ignore. A few months later, in a live stream, Yu Manglong appeared again with red eyes, looking directly into the camera and talking about Fuli and Huotui. The phrase, "I am sorry to it," was uttered in an unclear context, without an accompanying explanation. To an outsider, it might have been just an irrelevant comment. But in a live space, where every look and every pause is magnified, that sentence left a haunting resonance. What he was apologizing for, and to whom, were questions left unanswered, yet they persisted stubbornly. Throughout that live stream, Yu Manglong frequently glanced out of the frame as if looking for a reaction or permission. The most notable moment was when he suddenly raised his voice to ask if everyone could behave like human beings. The statement was quickly clipped and went viral. Some believed he was reacting to negative comments from the online community. Others believed those words were not directed at the audience, but at the people present outside the frame, those who held control over the space and the rhythm of the broadcast. There is no evidence to confirm which interpretation is correct. However, the very existence of multiple meanings for the same moment shows that ambiguity had become a permanent state in how the public received Yu Manglong's image during this phase. That ambiguity did not arise on its own. It was nurtured by the context, by indirect information, and by the feeling that there were things not allowed to be spoken directly. From these fragmented details, a core question gradually formed. Were Yu Manglong's expressions spontaneous reactions of an individual under psychological pressure, or were they the result of a long process of being placed in a tightly controlled environment? There is no simple answer. But when similar signals appeared repeatedly across different contexts, the possibility of coincidence began to look less convincing in the eyes of the public. At this stage, the important thing was not the conclusion, but the recognition. When an individual cannot clearly state what they are facing, indirect expressions become the only remaining language. And when that language is ignored or explained in the most convenient way, the distance between the human being and the system begins to widen. Yu Manglong, in the eyes of many, stood on that fragile boundary where every action could be interpreted in many directions, but none led to a true resolution. When Yu Manglong's personal expressions were no longer seen as isolated moments, the story entered another phase, where the focus was no longer on the behavior of an individual, but on the reaction of the crowd. This was the moment the public opinion stepped in, and from then on, every detail involved was placed under the microscope of social media. The incident no longer belonged to an artist or a management company. It became a collective phenomenon where every participant brought their own emotions, beliefs, and anxieties. One of the clearest turning points was when the online community began to dig into Yu Manglong's time as a high school student. Information previously considered harmless, such as his participation in a hosting competition organized by a university and winning an award, suddenly took on a completely different context. Attention turned to the fact that after that achievement, his educational path did not follow a familiar trajectory. Instead of smoothly proceeding to university, he participated in another entertainment competition, leading to a 1-year delay in his studies. Under normal circumstances, this might have been just a personal choice. But in a context where the story was being viewed through a lens of suspicion, that interruption was interpreted as a sign of an unclear turning point, marking the beginning of a complex series of later events. From here, other names began to appear in the flow of public opinion. A director once thought to be influential in the entertainment industry was mentioned alongside suspicions that had existed for years. The fact that this person approached the school environment to share creative experiences with students, an activity that is not uncommon, suddenly became a focal point of controversy. It was not because of a specific confirmed action, but because of the broader context the public was seeing. When a story has taken on the color of tragedy, every connection can be reread with a skeptical eye, and the boundary between analysis and speculation becomes thinner than ever. The spread of public opinion did not stop with figures from the past. The live streams of other artists were also scrutinized. Every statement and every emotional reaction was cut from its original context and placed alongside images of Yu Manglong. A strange remark during a live broadcast involving sending teeth quickly became a topic of discussion. It was not because of the specific content of the statement, but because it recalled images previously thought to be abnormal. When the speaker realized the slip of the tongue and blamed themselves right on the air, that moment further increased the feeling that there were things not allowed to be fully spoken. Parallel to that process, another young singer was also pulled into the whirlpool of public opinion. His continued appearances on major stages, participation in television programs, and commercial events became the target of opposition from a segment of the public. Calls for boycotts, reporting, and even demands for authorities to intervene appeared densely. To Yu Manglong's supporters, this was seen as the only way to create pressure and force the involved parties to face the unanswered questions. Conversely, for those more cautious, this wave carried the risk of collective condemnation, where emotion overwhelmed evidence and every silence was interpreted negatively. From there, two distinct streams of public opinion formed. One side believed that the details, however small, when woven together, painted an alarming picture of manipulation and invisible violence within the entertainment industry. For them, indignation was a legitimate reaction to a system believed to have abandoned a human being. The other side warned of the risk of overinterpretation, arguing that attributing every abnormal behavior to a single scenario could harm uninvolved people. They emphasized that while justice must be pursued, it cannot be based solely on emotions and unverified pieces of information. In that context, social media became a space that was both liberating and dangerous. It allowed voices that were once ignored to be heard, but at the same time, it amplified fear and suspicion. Side-by-side comparisons, slow-motion videos, and screenshotted and analyzed status updates all created an unceasing flow of information. For each individual participant, sharing a post or a comment could feel like contributing to the search for truth. But in the aggregate, that flow could also carry away judgments that had not yet been checked. For the artists involved, the impact was immediate and clear. Schedules were cancelled, public images changed, and psychological pressure increased. Even apologies, when they appeared, no longer brought the same solace as before, because in the tense atmosphere, every statement could be interpreted in a disadvantageous way. Careers built over many years could be shaken in a short time, not necessarily because of a specific action, but because of being placed in the eye of a storm larger than themselves. It is noteworthy that in that storm of public opinion, Yu Manglong himself was present only indirectly. He did not speak out to respond, nor did he appear to protect himself. This very absence increased the symbolic weight of the story. To many, he became the image of an individual who could not speak the whole truth within a complex system where every reaction could be controlled or distorted. At this stage, the story had gone far beyond the boundaries of a specific case. It became a test of how society reacts to suspicions about power and responsibility. Public opinion can be a tool to promote transparency, but it can also become an uncompromising pressure where the line between demanding justice and creating collective fear becomes increasingly blurred. And when questions remained officially unanswered, the information gap continued to be filled, not just with facts, but with emotions, beliefs, and prolonged skepticism. As the social media turmoil had yet to subside, the focus of the story gradually shifted away from personal expressions and the emotional reactions of the crowd to delve into another layer, where legal, financial, and power constraints began to emerge. This was the stage that many considered the most deadlocked moment, for it showed that the sense of suffocation came not only from mental pressure, but from invisible yet persistent structures that left almost no way out. According to information widely circulated in the community following the case, Yu Manglong was believed to be facing significant financial obligations. These sums were described as arising from contracts signed during the period when he was under strict professional management. In some indirect accounts, suspicions even emerged that there were agreements signed on his behalf or approved without him being fully informed. Although these details have not been confirmed by any legal authority, they still contributed to the image of an environment where control did not lie entirely in the hands of the person standing before the spotlights. In the entertainment industry, it is common for artists not to directly handle legal terms. However, when projects do not yield the expected results, financial responsibility is often shifted toward the representative figure. The compensation figures mentioned, as interpreted by the community, far exceeded the repayment capacity of an individual, even one who was once at the peak of their career. In that context, the concept of free choice became blurred. Continuing or withdrawing both carried heavy consequences, turning a career into a closed circle where every direction led to loss. Not stopping at official contracts, the story also expanded into personal financial relationships alleged to be lacking in transparency. A loan was mentioned as a symbol of the power imbalance behind the scenes. When reclaiming the money was said to be impossible, and the involved parties denied responsibility, the sense of being exploited was further reinforced in the public perception. Once again, the importance did not lie in affirming right or wrong, but in how these pieces of information were linked to create an image of an environment where risk always tilted toward the more vulnerable party. At that time, Yu Manglong was seen as an individual locked in from many sides. On one side were financial and legal obligations, on the other was a marked decline in professional resources and opportunities. When official channels failed to provide a transparent explanation, silence became a form of invisible pressure. It not only made it difficult for the person involved to seek support, but also left the public not knowing what to believe beyond fragmented pieces and indirect accounts. From this specific case, many analyses began to expand into a systemic issue. Insights from those who had worked in the field of arts education were mentioned as a deeply concerning background. Accordingly, power in the training environment did not stop at evaluating professional capacity, but could directly influence a student's future path. When that power is not strictly supervised, it easily becomes a tool of exchange, where opportunity and silence are placed on the same scale. The concept of the spiral of silence appeared in discussions as a way to describe a prolonged collective state. Young people, while still in the school environment, early on learn to adapt to unwritten rules. Parents, fearing for their children's futures, choose not to speak out. Those within the system, out of interest or fear, continue to maintain that state. When these individuals enter the entertainment industry, they carry with them the old lesson that resistance can mean being eliminated from the game. In that context, the fact that Yu Manglong was believed to have shown signs of not fully following the familiar operating logic of the system made him stand out. This difference, in the view of many, was not an advantage but a risk. A closed structure is often intolerant of elements that are difficult to control. The price of not remaining silent, even indirectly, was described as too great for a single individual. The climax of this stage did not lie in a specific event, but in a consciousness gradually forming within society. Yu Manglong was no longer seen only as an artist facing a crisis, but as a mirror reflecting the deeper problems of the entertainment and arts education industries. His story raised questions about the responsibility of organizations, the boundary between management and control, and who is truly responsible when an individual is pushed to their limit. At this point, separating personal tragedy from the consequences of a structure spanning many years became extremely difficult. Overlapping layers of power, hard-to-see interests, and a lack of transparency created an environment in which resistance was rarely protected. Yu Manglong, in this story, was placed at the center of a problem larger than himself, where every detail not only told the fate of a human being, but also exposed how a system operates when there is not enough light shining upon it. As the noise gradually faded, the story of Yu Manglong did not end with an official statement or a clear verdict. What remained was a prolonged void, where silence sometimes carried more weight than any explanation. In that void, Yu Manglong is remembered not just as an artist who once stood on a stage, but as a symbol of human fragility when facing opaque power structures. This story forces people to confront an uncomfortable question. Behind the brilliant aura, where does the boundary between management and control lie? When discipline is cited to maintain order, can it slide into an invasion of personal life for which no one takes responsibility? The sighs shared by previous generations, those who were once in the system, echo as a silent warning about the harsh gap between professional ideals and operational reality. In the collective memory taking shape, Yu Manglong seems to have become an open question about the common responsibility of society. Not the responsibility of a single individual or organization, but the responsibility of the entire environment that allowed the silence to persist. When a human being cannot speak what they are facing, and when indirect signals are ignored or interpreted in the most convenient way, the consequence does not stop at the fate of one person. It spreads, creating a sense of insecurity that the same could happen to anyone else. What remains in the end is not a lost reputation or missed opportunities, but the value of a human being who once existed and yearned to be heard. This story serves as a reminder that the right to live meaningfully is not just the right to exist biologically, but also the right to speak, to be protected, and to engage in dialogue during the most fragile moments. When power structures are not illuminated by enough light, it is the human beings who become the first to bear the consequences. Whether the future will truly change remains a question mark. It depends on whether society chooses to continue in silence or chooses to look directly at unstable structures to adjust and supervise them. Tragedies, if not named and analysed, tend to repeat in different forms with different people. Yu Manglong, in this story, becomes a reminder that kindness and fairness do not naturally exist, but need to be protected by continuous attention and responsibility. Perhaps the most important thing the story leaves behind is not a conclusion, but a choice. A choice between considering this a past event or a warning sign that needs to be remembered. For ultimately, what keeps society from sliding into apathy is the ability to listen to the weakest voices before they are completely submerged in silence.